I'm Haven Nash. In the eyes of my stepfather, Frank, I am just an aging, useless secretary, a woman he believes couldn't even pump her own gas. But he doesn't know that right there in the back seat of his cramped minivan, smelling of stale yogurt and resentment, I am running a global hostage rescue operation. The moment the Boeing 747 of Air Force One tore through the sky and touched down on that provincial runway, Frank's face drained of all color. He screamed at me, spit flying, "Get down, Haven! What are you smuggling? Drugs! You're going to get the whole family killed." He stared at the red laser dots of the Secret Service dancing around my feet and trembled, convinced this was the end for his useless stepdaughter. But he was wrong. Dead wrong. When the cabin door opened, I didn't get handcuffs. I got a sharp salute from a Marine colonel. If you have ever been looked down upon by your own family, pushed to the margins while you carried the weight of the world on your shoulders, then hit that subscribe button right now. Because today, we are going to teach them a lesson they will never forget about who is really in charge. 48 hours before the tarmac incident, the air conditioning at the Longhorn Steakhouse off I-66 was working overtime, battling the humid Northern Virginia heat. But it couldn't cool down the simmering rage in my chest. The booth smelled like burnt garlic butter and cheap cologne. Frank's cologne. "To Kyle," Frank announced, his voice booming loud enough to turn heads 3 tables away. He raised a glass of the house Cabernet, holding it by the bowl like a barbarian, leaving greasy fingerprints on the glass. A real man, a conqueror of the skies. My younger half-brother, Kyle, sat opposite me, looking smug. He swirled his soda, soaking in the adoration. He was 30 years old, still living in the basement suite I helped pay for. And today we were celebrating his monumental achievement, obtaining a private pilot's license for a single-engine Cessna. "That wasn't an easy check ride, Dad," Kyle said, feigning modesty while fishing for a piece of the Wild West shrimp. "The crosswind component was almost 5 knots. 5 knots? You hear that, Helen?" Frank slapped the table, making the silverware jump. My mother, Helen, nodded frantically, cutting her Flo's filet into tiny, nervous pieces. "Incredible," she chirped, avoiding my eyes. "Just incredible, Kyle." "That's what separates the men from the boys," Frank declared, pointing a steak knife at me for emphasis. "Aerodynamics, Haven. It's not just driving a car. You have to understand physics. Lift, drag, thrust. Things you don't need to worry about in your little travel secretary job." I slowly chewed a piece of broccoli. I wanted to tell him that a 5-knot crosswind is what we call a calm day at Andrews Air Force Base. I wanted to correct his explanation of Bernoulli's principle, which he was currently butchering to explain how a wing works. As the director of the Crisis Response Division at the NSC, I spent my mornings briefing Joint Chiefs on aerial refueling logistics for supersonic bombers. But I said nothing. I just nodded. "Congratulations, Kyle. Safe flights." Frank snorted. "Safe? Safety is for people who are afraid to live, Haven. Kyle is taking risks. He's out there doing things. Meanwhile, you're just booking hotels for politicians." My pocket buzzed. It wasn't a normal vibration. It was the frantic double pulse pattern of my secure BlackBerry, the one I kept hidden inside my purse. That pattern meant one thing: flash override, the highest priority alert. My heart rate didn't spike. Training took over. I slid my hand under the table, finding the device by touch. I needed to see the code. Was it the embassy in Sudan? Or the hostages in the Balkans? I pulled the phone out, just an inch below the table's edge, shielding the screen with my napkin. Slam. Frank's hand came down on the table, right next to my plate. The noise was like a gunshot in the crowded restaurant. The chatter at the nearby tables died instantly. "Put it down," Frank hissed, his face flushing a deep, ugly red. "We are celebrating your brother's achievement, and you are checking Facebook?" "Frank, I am sick of it, Haven." He was shouting now, performing for the audience of diners. "Every time we try to have a family moment, you're glued to that screen. It's an addiction, it's rude, and quite frankly, it's embarrassing." Do you think those bureaucrats you book flights for care if you answer an email at 7 p.m. on a Friday? I looked at the screen. The message was 3 words: coup in progress. 300 American citizens were currently trapped in a conflict zone, and the extraction window was closing in 4 hours. I needed to authorize the deployment of a carrier strike group. Right now. But Frank saw a disrespectful daughter playing on Instagram. I looked at my mother. She was staring at her mashed potatoes, shrinking into herself. "Haven, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Just put it away. Listen to your father." Kyle was telling a story. I took a breath. A long, slow inhale through my nose. This is what I did. I de-escalated warlords. I could handle a narcissist in a steakhouse. "You're right, Frank," I said, my voice steady, betraying nothing of the storm inside me. I slid the phone back into my purse, mentally calculating how many minutes I could afford to lose before sneaking to the bathroom. "I apologize. Please, Kyle, tell us more about the Cessna." Frank huffed, satisfied with his victory. He leaned back, the vinyl booth creaking under his weight. "See? Was that so hard? You need to learn some respect. Maybe if you listened more, you'd find a husband instead of marrying your job." The rest of the dinner was a blur of Frank's voice and the metallic taste of adrenaline in my mouth. I nodded at the right times. I smiled when Kyle bragged about landing on a grass strip. Then came the check. The waitress, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, placed the black leather folder in the center of the table. Frank picked it up. He made a show of putting on his reading glasses, scanning the receipt. He frowned, humming and hawing, tapping his finger on the total amount. $185. Not a fortune, but for a retired mid-level manager who spent too much on aviation hobbies, it was a pinch. He sighed loudly, taking off his glasses. He looked at Kyle with pride, then his eyes slid to me with a cold, calculating gleam. "You know," Frank said, tossing the folder onto the table so it slid right in front of my water glass. "This is a big night for the family. And Haven, since you're the only one here with no dependents, no husband, no kids to feed." He grinned. It wasn't a smile, it was a challenge. "Your money is just sitting there gathering dust, isn't it? Why don't you treat your brother? It's the least you can do for missing his graduation ceremony last week." I hadn't missed it. I was in the Situation Room monitoring a drone strike. "Frank, I thought this was your treat," my mother murmured weakly. "Nonsense, Helen," Frank laughed, clapping a heavy hand on Kyle's shoulder. "Haven wants to contribute. She wants to show she cares. Right, Haven?" I looked at the folder. Inside that purse, next to the phone that held the fate of a nation, was my wallet. I made 6 figures. I could buy this restaurant if I wanted to. But that wasn't the point. It was the assumption, the entitlement, the way he relegated me to the role of the family financier while stripping me of any respect. "Of course," I said softly. I reached into my purse, my fingers brushed against the secure phone again. Coup in progress. I pulled out my card, a heavy black titanium card that Frank wouldn't recognize as exclusive government issue. I placed it in the folder. "Happy flying, Kyle," I said. Frank winked at the waitress as she came back. "She's paying. Good girl." As the waitress walked away, I heard the sharp, electronic beep of the credit card machine from the server station. That sound, that single, high-pitched tone. It echoed in my head, merging with the sudden, piercing ring of the emergency alert that I could no longer ignore. Beep. The sound of my money buying their silence. Beep. The sound of the countdown beginning. That high-pitched electronic beep from the credit card machine didn't just signal a transaction. It triggered a memory, pulling me back through time to a day that should have been a milestone, but instead became the foundation of my invisibility. It was 7 years ago. The humid air of a Washington, D.C. May was suffocating, thick enough to chew on. I was standing on the lawn of George Washington University, sweating under the heavy black fabric of my master's gown. Around me, families were erupting in joy. Fathers hoisting daughters onto their shoulders, mothers adjusting mortarboards, champagne corks popping in the distance. I scanned the crowd, clutching my diploma in international relations so hard the leather cover creaked. I was looking for Frank's bald spot or my mother's nervous smile. I checked my phone. One missed call. One voicemail. I pressed play, and Frank's voice, tinny and distracted, floated into my ear. Haven, look, we're not going to make it. Kyle took a nasty spill at his varsity soccer game. His knee is looking pretty purple, kiddo. We're taking him to urgent care just to be safe. You know how it is. Can't risk his scholarship chances. Grab yourself a nice dinner or something. We're proud of you. The line went dead. I stood there, surrounded by thousands of cheering strangers, and felt the blood drain from my face. Kyle was 17. A bruised knee. He hadn't broken a bone. He hadn't been rushed to surgery. He had a bruise. And for that, my 6 years of academic grind, the sleepless nights writing thesis papers on nuclear nonproliferation, the internships at the State Department, it all vanished. I was the backup plan, the extra. The scenery in the movie of their lives where Kyle was the undisputed star. That was the day the word secretary started to burn like a brand on my skin. It wasn't just Frank's ignorance, it was his deliberate refusal to see me. After 9/11, like so many Americans my age, I felt a calling. The towers fell, and the world changed. I wanted to enlist. I wanted to do something that mattered. I remembered sitting at the kitchen table, telling Frank I was considering officer candidate school. He had laughed, not a chuckle, but a belly laugh that rattled his coffee mug. You? In boots? Frank had wiped a tear from his eye. Sweetheart, look at you. You're soft. You're quiet. You like order. You don't lead men into battle, Haven. You're built for logistics. Taking notes. Making sure the coffee is hot for the men who make the decisions. You'd make a fantastic secretary for a general, maybe. He framed it as advice. He called it realism. But it was gaslighting, pure and simple. He needed me to be small so he could feel big. He needed me to be the travel secretary because if he acknowledged that I was actually an intelligence analyst coordinating with the Department of Defense, he would have to admit that his stepdaughter had surpassed him in every conceivable metric of success. And then there was the house, the split-level ranch in Fairfax with the manicured lawn that Frank was so proud of. He loved to lecture anyone who would listen at neighborhood barbecues about his financial wizardry. It's all about asset management, he'd say, holding a Bud Light, gesturing to the vinyl siding. I retired early because I know how to make a dollar stretch. The market is for suckers. Real estate is where the smart money lives. He had no idea. 5 years ago, Frank made a series of bad bets on penny stocks he read about in a spam email. They were underwater on the mortgage. The bank was threatening foreclosure. My mother had called me, sobbing, begging me not to tell Frank because it would break his heart. So, I fixed it. Every month, on the 1st, an automatic transfer of $2,000 leaves my account and goes directly to their lender. I labeled it consulting fees in the bank transfer notes, so if Frank ever saw a statement, he wouldn't question it. I saved his house. I saved his pride. And in return, I got to sit at a Longhorn steakhouse and be told I didn't understand the value of a dollar. I know I'm not the only one. If you have ever been the invisible bank for your family, paying the bills, solving the problems, and fixing the messes while they treat you like you're incompetent, please hit that like button right now. And in the comments, just write, I see you. Let's prove to each other that our sacrifices aren't invisible here. Back in the present, the memory faded, replaced by the cool, recycled air of my apartment. It was 3 a.m. The only light in the room came from the glow of 3 encrypted monitors arranged in a semicircle on my desk. On the center screen, a satellite feed showed a grainy, thermal image of a convoy moving through a desert halfway across the world. A coup had just toppled a government in North Africa. 300 American aid workers and engineers were trapped in a compound, surrounded by militia trucks mounted with heavy machine guns. My secure line blinked red. It was the Admiral of the 6th Fleet. Director Nash, his voice crackled in my earpiece, sharp and professional. We are in position. Ospreys are spooled up. We are waiting on your green light for the extraction corridor. I looked at the map. I looked at the intelligence report scrolling on the left screen. Lives hung in the balance of my next sentence. I took a sip from the mug on my desk. The coffee was cold, black, and bitter. Frank's voice echoed in the back of my mind. You're only good for making sure the coffee is hot for the men who make decisions. I set the mug down. My hand didn't tremble. Admiral, I said, my voice steady, carrying the weight of the White House behind it. You have a go. Execute Operation Archangel. Get our people home. I wasn't a secretary. I wasn't a backup plan. I was the one holding the line while the rest of the world, including Frank and Kyle, slept soundly in the beds I helped pay for. But as I watched the thermal signatures of the Marines moving in to save lives, I knew the hardest battle wasn't happening in that desert. It was happening tomorrow morning. Frank had confiscated my car keys. He had trapped me in his world. And in a few hours, I would have to step out of this command center, put on my useless daughter mask, and get back into that minivan. I looked at the blinking cursor on my screen. The operation was underway, but I had my own extraction to plan. And unlike the convoy on my screen, I didn't have a fleet coming to save me. I had to save myself. The plan I had formulated in the dark at 3 a.m. was flawless, simple, efficient, and precise. I would shower, grab my pre-packed go bag, which contained a satellite uplink, a change of clothes, and 2 encrypted hard drives, and be on the I-66 on-ramp by 6:15. I would reach the White House Situation Room by 6:45, just in time to brief the National Security Advisor before the President's morning intelligence update. But as the military strategist Helmuth von Moltke once said, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. He just didn't know the enemy would be a retired airline middle manager in khaki cargo shorts. At 6:05 a.m., the secure phone in my pocket vibrated with a violence that rattled my teeth. It was the specific 3-pulse pattern indicating a flash override, a priority level that supersedes all other civilian and military communications. I glanced at the screen. The threat level had just escalated to DEFCON 3. The militia in the North African desert had moved their artillery into firing range of the hostage compound. We had moved from a monitoring situation to an active crisis. I sprinted down the hallway of my mother's house, my heels clicking sharply on the hardwood. I burst out the front door, adrenaline flooding my system, my mind already calculating flight paths for Reaper drones. I reached for the door handle of my dark gray sedan parked in the driveway. It was my sanctuary, my escape pod, my connection to the adult world where I commanded respect. And just where do you think you're going? The voice stopped me cold. I looked up. Frank was standing at the end of the driveway, planted firmly in the center of the asphalt, like a troll guarding a bridge. He was wearing an oversized polo shirt tucked into shorts that were pulled up too high, holding a mug of coffee that read, World's Best Grandpa, a gift from a family that didn't exist yet, bought by himself. Frank, move, I said, my voice clipped. I opened my car door and threw my bag onto the passenger seat. I have to go into the office. It's an emergency. Frank took a slow, deliberate sip of his coffee. He didn't budge. On a Sunday? I don't think so. We talked about this last night, Haven. Today is Kyle's fly-in. The whole family goes. That includes you. I don't have time for this, I snapped, sliding into the driver's seat. I jammed my key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, a sweet, powerful sound of freedom. I put the car in reverse. The backup camera screen flickered on, showing Frank's distorted, red-faced figure standing directly behind my bumper. He wasn't moving. He was crossing his arms. I rolled down my window. Frank, get out of the way. I have 300 lives depending on me being at my desk in 40 minutes. He walked around to the driver's side window. He leaned down, placing a hand on the roof of my car, invading my space with the smell of stale coffee and aggressive entitlement. 300 lives? Frank chuckled, shaking his head. Always the drama queen. You book flights, Haven. You're not saving the world. You're avoiding your family. You're jealous of your brother, and frankly, it's ugly. I am not jealous, I said, my hand hovering over the gear shift. I am employed. Now move, or I will back out around you. You need to learn to slow down, Frank said. His eyes dropped to the ignition. In a split second, instinct screamed at me to roll up the window. But I was too slow. Frank's hand darted inside the car. It was a violation so sudden, so absurd, that my brain couldn't process it immediately. His thick, calloused fingers wrapped around the key fob. "No!" I shouted, grabbing his wrist. "Let go!" he barked. He twisted his wrist with a strength I didn't know he had, the hysterical strength of a man terrified of losing control. He ripped the keys out of the ignition. The engine died instantly. The dashboard lights flickered and went black. Silence crashed down on the driveway. The only sound was the chirping of birds and the heavy breathing of a man who thought he had just won a victory. I sat there, frozen, my hand still reaching for the empty ignition slot. My car, my property, my freedom, my lifeline to the Situation Room, was now a 2-ton paperweight. Frank stood up, dangling the keys in front of my face like he was taunting a toddler. He slipped them into the deep pocket of his cargo shorts. "I'm confiscating these," he said, his voice dropping to that patronizing teacher tone he loved so much. "Since you want to act like a spoiled child who can't follow family rules, I'm going to treat you like one. You're grounded from the car, Haven." "Frank," I said, my voice trembling with a rage so cold it felt like ice in my veins. "Give me back my keys. That is theft. That is federal property inside that vehicle." "It's a Toyota, Haven, not a tank," he scoffed. "Now get out. You're riding in the van with us. We're leaving in 5 minutes. Don't make me come drag you out." He turned and walked toward the house, his flip-flops smacking against his heels, satisfied with his parenting. I sat in the dead car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I could call the police. I could call the Secret Service detail assigned to my division. They would be here in 10 minutes. They would tackle Frank, handcuff him on his manicured lawn, and retrieve my keys. But 10 minutes was too long. And the paperwork, the scandal, the background checks on my family that would follow. It would derail the operation. I couldn't afford a domestic dispute report when I needed top-secret clearance to authorize a drone strike. I looked at my secure phone. DEFCON 3. The mission was the only thing that mattered. If I couldn't get to the command center, I had to bring the command center to me. I swallowed the scream that was clawing at my throat. I grabbed my go bag. I stepped out of my sedan, slamming the door shut. I walked toward the open garage where the beige Honda Odyssey sat waiting. It was covered in pollen and bumper stickers that said, "Proud parent of an honor student." It was the chariot of suburban mediocrity. I slid the side door open. The interior smelled of old French fries, wet dog, and the unmistakable sour scent of spilled yogurt that had baked in the Virginia sun. "Good choice," Frank called out from the front porch, jingling my keys in his pocket. "See? Isn't it nice to be part of the team?" I climbed into the back seat, squeezing myself between a massive child safety seat for a nephew who visited once a year, and a cooler full of sodas. I pulled my knees to my chest. I put my earbuds in. I tapped the screen of my phone, initializing the secure link to the Pentagon. Thud. The automatic door slid shut, sealing me inside. Frank thought he had stripped me of my power by taking my keys. He thought he had trapped me. But as I watched him waddle toward the driver's seat, I realized he had made a fatal error. He had just locked himself in a metal box with a woman who was about to orchestrate a war, and there was no escape for him now. Interstate 66 was doing what it did best on a Saturday morning: nothing. It was a 30-mile-long parking lot of shimmering heat and exhaust fumes, stretching from the D.C. Beltway out into the Virginia suburbs. Inside Frank's Honda Odyssey, the atmosphere was even more suffocating. The air conditioning was wheezing, struggling to battle the humidity, but it stood no chance against the smell. It was a specific, cloying scent unique to family road trips, a mixture of stale fast food French fries, the faint, sour odor of old yogurt spilled weeks ago, and Frank's overwhelming musk of cheap aftershave and self-righteousness. I was wedged in the back row, my knees pressed against the back of the middle seat. To my left was a giant plastic cooler filled with generic brand soda. To my right was a child safety seat belonging to my cousin's toddler, covered in sticky residue and crumbs of crushed Cheerios. The hard plastic of the car seat dug into my hip with every lurch of the stop-and-go traffic. "You see this, Kyle?" Frank said, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror to make sure he had an audience. He tapped the steering wheel with authority. This is why you check your tire pressure. Half these idiots are driving on soft rubber. Increases the drag coefficient, burns gas, bad for the asphalt. It's basic physics, but nobody teaches that anymore. I kept my head down, my hair falling forward like a curtain to hide the wireless earpiece in my right ear. Copy that, Admiral, I whispered, barely moving my lips. What is the status of the extraction team? Director Nash, the voice of Admiral Holloway, commander of the 6th Fleet, came through crystal clear, a stark contrast to the static of the minivan's radio. The Osprey team is refueling mid-air. We are holding at the rendezvous point. But we have a problem. Intelligence suggests the militia has acquired shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles. We need authorization to engage preemptively. Hold fire, I whispered. If we shoot first, the hostages die. I need visual confirmation on the SAM sites. Haven! Frank's voice cut through the Admiral's report like a foghorn. I flinched, instinctively sliding my phone under my thigh. Yes, Frank. Are you listening? He waved a hand at the glove compartment. I was just telling your brother that a real pilot doesn't rely on GPS. GPS rots your brain. If the satellites go down, what do you have? You have a paper map. Hand me the Rand McNally from the pocket there. He wanted me to pass him a road atlas, a book of paper maps that hadn't been updated since 2015. Frank, we're on I-66, I said, trying to keep the irritation out of my voice. It's a straight line. We don't need a map. It's about the principle, Haven. He sighed, looking at my mother in the passenger seat. Helen, she just doesn't get it. No situational awareness. That's why she's stuck in a cubicle. My mother just nodded, staring out the window. She's tired, Frank. Let her be. I'm teaching her, Frank insisted. Kyle, tell her. When you're up in the Cessna today, are you going to stare at an iPad or are you going to look out the window? Kyle, sitting in the front passenger seat, the shotgun position of honor, turned around. He adjusted his aviator sunglasses, which he was wearing inside the car. He looked like a budget version of Tom Cruise, if Tom Cruise still lived in his parents' basement. Visual flight rules, Dad, Kyle said, flashing a grin. Eyes on the horizon. That's real flying. He looked at me, scanning my huddled form in the back corner. Who are you talking to, anyway? Kyle asked, a smirk playing on his lips. I saw your lips moving. You chatting with an internet boyfriend? Or are you booking a vacation for some senator? Just work, Kyle, I said quietly. Work, he scoffed. Hey, ask your boss if he can get me a discount on a hotel in Miami. I'm thinking of taking the Cessna down there once I get my instrument rating. I'll see what I can do, I lied. In my ear, the Admiral's voice returned, tense and urgent. Director, we have a development. The President has been briefed. He's invoking the National Command Authority. He wants a direct secure video conference with you, immediate effect. He wants to look you in the eye before he authorizes a strike. My stomach dropped. The President of the United States wanted a face-to-face briefing. Now. I looked at the dashboard clock. 9:15 a.m. We were still 20 minutes from the airfield. I was trapped in a moving prison of mediocrity. I couldn't jump out. The traffic was moving at 10 miles per hour, but running down the interstate shoulder would attract the state police, and Frank would undoubtedly chase me. Director, the Admiral pressed. The President is airborne on Air Force One. He's en route to D.C., but he can divert. Where are you? We need a secure facility. I looked out the window. Through the haze of heat and exhaust, I saw a green highway sign. Exit 44. Manassas Regional Airport. 2 miles, Manassas. A general aviation airport. It had a control tower. It had a runway long enough for corporate jets. And, crucially, it was where Frank was taking us. A wild, audacious idea formed in my mind. It was reckless. It was insane. It would blow my cover completely. But I had no choice. The hostages didn't have time for me to be polite. Admiral, I whispered, shielding my mouth with my hand. I am not in a secure facility. I am mobile. But I can secure a landing zone. Say again, Director. I pulled up the encrypted map on my phone. I tapped the location of the small provincial airport we were heading toward. I hit Send Coordinates. Route the president to these coordinates, I ordered, my voice finding that cold, steel register that terrified my subordinates. Tell the pilot to prepare for a short field landing. It's a 6,000-foot runway. The VC-25 can make it if he dumps fuel. You want to land Air Force One at a regional airstrip in Virginia? The admiral sounded stunned. If the president wants his briefing, that is where I will be, I said. Bring the transport group to me. Copy that, Director. Relaying to the Secret Service now. I exhaled, leaning back against the uncomfortable seat. What are you mumbling about now? Frank called out, eyes back on the mirror. We're almost there. Fix your hair, Haven. You look like a mess. I don't want you embarrassing your brother in front of the other pilots. I'm just checking the weather, Frank, I said. Looks like there might be some heavy traffic in the sky today. Frank laughed, a harsh barking sound. Traffic? At this little airport, it's just us enthusiasts, Haven, real aviators, not those commercial buses you book tickets for. You'll see. It's going to be quiet, peaceful, just Kyle and the open sky. I looked down at my phone. The confirmation code flashed on the screen. Asset inbound, ETA, 15 minutes. You're right, Frank, I said, a small, dangerous smile touching my lips for the first time that morning. It's going to be a day to remember. He had absolutely no idea. He thought he was driving the master of the house to his kingdom. He didn't realize he was chauffeuring the Grim Reaper to a meeting with God. The minivan lurched as we took the exit ramp. The sign for the airport loomed ahead. I tightened my grip on my phone. The command center wasn't in the White House basement anymore. It was right here, next to the crushed Cheerios, and the world was about to come crashing down on Frank's little Sunday drive. The midday sun over Manassas Regional Airport was not just hot, it was aggressive. It bounced off the white concrete and the aluminum hangars, creating shimmering waves of heat that made the horizon dance. The air smelled of burnt asphalt and the sweet, chemical tang of avgas, a scent Frank inhaled deeply, puffing out his chest as if he were breathing in pure heroism. We stood on the tarmac in front of the object of his worship, a 1946 Piper J3 Cub. Frank spoke about this plane as if it were a Lockheed Martin F-22 Raptor. In reality, it was a tiny, fabric-covered antique painted a shade of yellow that reminded me of a bruised banana. It had a top speed that could be rivaled by a determined Toyota Camry on the interstate, and it looked like a strong gust of wind might fold it in half. Look at her, Haven, Frank said, placing a reverent hand on the propeller. This is aviation. Pure and simple. No computers, no government tracking, just man and machine. He turned to a young line technician, a kid barely out of high school who was trying to fuel a sleek corporate jet nearby. Hey, son, Frank shouted, waving his arms. You're grounding that too close to the intake. You want to blow us all to kingdom come? Watch your static discharge. The kid rolled his eyes, muttered something under his breath, and continued his work. Frank turned back to us, shaking his head. Amateurs. The whole industry's going to hell. Nobody respects the physics anymore. I stood a few feet back, clutching my purse against my chest. My phone was vibrating rhythmically against my ribs. A silent countdown. 10 minutes. Haven, don't just stand there like a statue, Frank barked, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. Make yourself useful. Your brother is about to undertake a serious flight. He needs hydration. Run into the FBO and get him a Dr. Pepper, and get your mother a Diet Coke. Chop chop. Do you want anything, Frank? I asked, my voice flat. I don't need anything but the wind in my hair, he said dramatically. Go. I walked across the baking tarmac toward the fixed base operator building. Inside, the air conditioning was a blessing. I walked past the lounge where real pilots, men and women in crisp uniforms flying Gulfstreams and Learjets, were checking weather radars. They glanced at me, the woman in the sensible blouse and slacks, assuming I was a lost passenger. I stood in front of the vending machine, feeding quarters into the slot. Clink, clink, clink. It was surreal. I was the woman who had just authorized a cryptographic key change for the entire Sixth Fleet And here I was, fishing for loose change to buy a soda for a 30-year-old man who thought flying a kite with an engine made him Chuck Yeager. I grabbed the cold cans, Dr. Pepper, Diet Coke. The condensation dripped onto my hand. When I returned to the plane, Kyle was already in the cockpit, or rather the front seat of the fabric kite. He was wearing his aviator sunglasses and checking his wrist, looking at a watch that was far too expensive for someone unemployed. "Thanks, sis," Kyle said, taking the soda without looking at me. He cracked it open, taking a long swig. "Man, the density altitude is high today. Going to be a tricky climb out." "You'll handle it," Frank said, beaming. He looked at me and pointed to a large golf umbrella lying on the ground. "Haven, open that up and hold it over the cockpit. The sun is heating up the instrument panel. We can't have the gauges drifting." "You want me to hold the umbrella?" I asked. "Yes, hold the umbrella," Frank snapped. "Protect the equipment. God, do I have to explain everything? Stand there. No, further back. You're blocking the airflow to the intake." I stepped back, hoisting the heavy umbrella over Kyle's head like a servant attending to a pharaoh. My arm ached. The heat radiated up through the soles of my shoes. "Pre-flight check," Kyle announced, his voice dropping an octave to sound deeper. "Altimeter set, magnetos off, throttle cracked." Frank pulled a bulky black handheld radio scanner from his belt loop. It was an ancient device from Radio Shack that he carried everywhere, claiming it gave him intel that the news didn't report. He extended the telescopic antenna, turning the squelch knob until the static hissed loudly. "Tower is quiet," Frank noted, listening to the fuzz. "Good. Means we have the pattern to ourselves." I shifted my weight. The vibration in my purse had stopped. That meant only one thing: asset on final approach. Suddenly, the static on Frank's radio changed. It wasn't the lazy hiss of an open channel anymore. It was a sharp, rhythmic interference, the kind you hear when a massive electromagnetic source overpowers a receiver. Zuzzed, zuzzed, pop. Then, a voice cut through the noise. It wasn't the bored local controller I usually heard on Frank's scanner. This voice was different. It was crisp, authoritative, and terrifyingly calm. "Break! Break! All stations, Manassas Tower. Implementing immediate ground stop. Security level 1 in effect. All aircraft on the ground, hold position. All aircraft in the pattern, depart the airspace immediately. This is a federal mandate." Frank frowned, tapping the side of his radio. "What? What kind of garbage is this?" "Repeat," the voice continued, louder this time. "Ground stop. Clear the runway. Unidentified heavy traffic inbound. Expedite." The young technician fueling the jet dropped his hose. The pilots I had seen in the FBO were running out onto the balcony, looking at the sky. Frank looked at the radio, then at Kyle. He let out a scoff of disbelief. "Ground stop." Frank laughed, a nervous, irritated sound. "For what? There's not a cloud in the sky. This is ridiculous. Probably some bureaucrat in DC pushed the wrong button." "Dad, maybe we should wait," Kyle said, his hand hovering over the starter. He looked less like Top Gun and more like a confused kid. "Nonsense," Frank yelled over the sound of a siren starting up in the distance. "It's a drill, Kyle. They do this to scare the hobbyists away. We have rights. We filed a flight plan. Well, we were about to. Start the engine." "Frank," I said, lowering the umbrella, "you should listen to the radio." Frank spun on me, his face purple in the heat. "Don't you start, Haven. You don't know the first thing about FAA regulations. I've been listening to this scanner for 20 years. If it was real, I'd know." He turned back to Kyle, waving his hand dismissively at the empty blue sky. "Kick the tires and light the fires, son. Let's show them what this bird can do before they close the runway for their little game." Kyle nodded, emboldened by his father's stupidity. He reached for the ignition switch. "Clear prop," Kyle shouted. The little propeller spun. The engine coughed, sputtered, and roared to life with the noise of a very angry lawnmower. Frank pumped his fist, shouting over the engine noise. "That's it! Taxi to the hold line. Ignore the tower." I stepped back, folding the umbrella. I looked to the east. Frank was looking at the yellow toy in front of him. He was looking at the pavement. He was looking at his shoes. He wasn't looking up. But I was. And in the distance, a dark speck was growing larger against the sun. It wasn't a cloud, it wasn't a bird, and it certainly wasn't a drill. The air pressure dropped. The birds stopped singing. Even the drone of the Piper Cub seemed to falter, as if the machine itself was trembling in the presence of a predator. Frank screamed something at the tower, shaking his fist. He had no idea that in about 30 seconds, his entire understanding of the universe was about to be obliterated by 4 General Electric CF6 turbofan engines. It started as a vibration in the soles of my shoes, a low, thrumming tremor that traveled up my legs and settled in my chest, rattling my ribcage. The birds that had been chirping around the hangar suddenly went silent. The wind picked up, but it wasn't a natural breeze. It was a pressure front, a wall of displaced air pushing ahead of something massive. "What is that?" Kyle shouted, looking around wildly. "Is that a storm front?" Frank looked up from his shoes, squinting against the glare. "Don't be stupid, Kyle. It's probably a C-130 transport from the guard base. Loud, clumsy things." But then the sun went out. A shadow fell over the tarmac. Not the passing shade of a cumulus cloud, but a total, terrifying eclipse. It swallowed the yellow Piper Cub. It swallowed Frank. It swallowed the entire airfield. I looked up, shielding my eyes, and watched the monster descend. It was the most beautiful and terrifying thing I had ever seen. The underbelly of the Boeing 747-200B was a vast expanse of polished aluminum and sky blue paint. It hung in the air, defying gravity, a leviathan of metal and power that blotted out the sky. The noise hit us a split second later. It wasn't a sound you heard, it was a sound you felt. The scream of 4 General Electric CF6 turbofan engines at idle was enough to vibrate teeth in their sockets. As the pilot flared for landing, the roar escalated to a deafening, earth-shattering howl. "Get back!" Frank screamed, but his voice was lost in the cacophony. The sheer force of the jet wash hit us like a physical blow. Frank's hat, the one that proclaimed him the world's best grandpa, was ripped from his head and sent tumbling across the asphalt into a drainage ditch. The Piper Cub rocked violently on its suspension, its wings dipping dangerously as if bowing in submission. Screech! 600,000 pounds of American diplomacy slammed onto the runway. Smoke erupted from the 18 main landing gear tires as they bit into the pavement. The smell of burning rubber instantly overpowered the scent of Frank's cheap cologne. The massive aircraft slowed, its thrust reversers deploying with a mechanical roar that sounded like the end of the world. It taxied toward us, a towering wall of steel. And then, I saw it. The detail that broke Frank's brain. The flag. High on the tail, the American flag stood proud. And sweeping across the fuselage in impeccable font were the words, "United States of America." This wasn't a C-130. This wasn't a training exercise. This was the VC-25, the Flying White House. The aircraft came to a halt less than 100 yards from where we stood. The engine spooled down to a high-pitched whine, but the silence that followed was even heavier. I looked at Frank. He wasn't looking at the plane with awe. He was looking at it with sheer, unadulterated terror. His face had drained of all color, leaving his skin the shade of wet ash. His eyes were wide, darting back and forth like a trapped animal. He collapsed. Frank's knees gave out, and he hit the tarmac hard. He scrambled backward on his hands and butt, trying to put distance between himself and the aircraft. "Haven!" he shrieked, his voice cracking. He lunged out and grabbed my ankle, his fingernails digging into my skin through my pant leg. Get down, you idiot!" "Frank, let go," I said, my voice calm amidst the chaos. "What did you do?" he screamed, spit flying from his lips. "Why are they here? Is this the FBI? Are you smuggling drugs? Oh my God, you're laundering money for terrorists, aren't you? That's where the mortgage money came from." He was hyperventilating now, his narcissism twisting reality into a pretzel. In Frank's small, fearful world, the government only showed up to punish. He couldn't conceive of a reality where authority arrived to serve. "They're going to arrest us all," Frank wailed, pulling harder on my leg. "I didn't know. Officer, I didn't know. She's the stepdaughter. I have nothing to do with her." He was already selling me out. The engines hadn't even stopped spinning, and he was already offering me up as a sacrifice to save his own skin. Kyle was no better. He was standing behind the wing of his Piper Cub, hands raised in the air as if surrendering to an invisible army, a wet stain spreading rapidly across the front of his khaki shorts. Suddenly, the tarmac was swarmed. Black SUVs with flashing lights tore around the corner of the hangar, screeching to a halt between us and the plane. Men in dark suits poured out, Secret Service agents. They moved with fluid, lethal precision, forming a perimeter. Frank saw the red laser dots from the counter-assault team dancing on the pavement near his feet. He curled into a fetal position, covering his head with his hands. "Don't shoot! I'm a patriot! I pay my taxes! It's her! Take her!" I looked down at the man groveling at my feet. This was the man who had lectured me on leadership over a steak dinner. This was the man who had confiscated my car keys to teach me a lesson. This was the man who had spent 20 years telling me I was small, weak, and fit only for secretarial work. And now, he was sobbing into the asphalt because a plane landed. This is the moment. If you have ever seen a bully crumble the second they lost control, if you have ever watched a narcissist turn into a coward when faced with real power, hit that like button right now. And in the comments, I want you to write one word: karma. Let's see how many of us have waited for a moment just like this. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't anger anymore. It was pity. I shook my leg, hard. "Get off me, Frank," I said. He looked up, blinking through his tears. "Haven, stay down. You'll get us killed." "No, Frank," I said, my voice cutting through the humid air like a blade. "I won't." I kicked his hand away from my ankle. I brushed a speck of dust from my blazer. I reached into my purse and pulled out my ID badge, the one I usually kept hidden in a zippered pocket. I clipped it onto my lapel. The gold seal of the executive office of the president glinted in the sun. "Haven," Frank whispered, confusion warring with his fear. Where are you going?" I didn't answer him. I didn't look at Kyle cowering by his toy plane. I turned my back on the minivan, on the spilled sodas, on the petty, small life they had tried to imprison me in. I started walking. I walked straight toward the line of black SUVs, straight toward the men with assault rifles, straight toward the massive staircase that was slowly unfolding from the belly of the beast. The wind whipped my hair back, but I didn't flinch. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking away from something. I was walking toward who I really was. The distance between Frank's Honda Odyssey and the staircase of Air Force One was less than 50 yards. But as I walked it, it felt like I was crossing the widest canyon in the world. Behind me lay a lifetime of being told I was small, incompetent, and irrelevant. Ahead of me lay the world where I commanded armies. I didn't run, I walked. My heels clicked rhythmically on the hot asphalt, a steady metronome counting down the final seconds of Frank's delusion. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Fast, aggressive movement. 2 black Chevrolet Suburbans tore across the tarmac, flanking the giant aircraft. They didn't slow down gently. They slammed on their brakes, drifting slightly. Tires screaming in protest as they created a physical barricade between me and the rest of the airport. The doors flew open before the vehicles even came to a complete stop. "Federal agents, back up! Get back!" 6 men in dark suits poured out. They moved with a terrifying synchronized fluidity that made them look less like individuals and more like a single organism designed for violence. They wore wraparound sunglasses and earpieces, and in their hands, they held Daniel Defense MK-18 rifles at the low-ready position. They didn't look at me. They didn't need to. They knew exactly who the asset was. Instead, they formed a perfect V-shape, a phalanx, around me. They turned their backs to me, facing outward, creating a wall of human steel. Their weapons were pointed directly at the only threat in the vicinity: a 68-year-old man in cargo shorts and a 30-year-old fake pilot with a wet stain spreading on his pants. "Don't shoot! Oh God, don't shoot!" Frank's voice was a high-pitched shriek, unrecognizable from the booming baritone he used to lecture me about tire pressure. I stopped and turned slowly. Through the gaps between the agent's shoulders, I saw him. Frank was on his knees. He had thrown his hands up so fast he nearly dislocated a shoulder. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. He looked at the laser sights dancing on the pavement near his knees and dissolved. I didn't do it, Frank screamed at the agents, pointing a shaking finger at me. I don't know what she did, but I'm not part of it. I'm a taxpayer. I'm a good citizen. She's the stepdaughter. She's mentally unstable. Take her. Just don't hurt me. The betrayal was immediate. It was instinctive. In the face of authority, the man who claimed to be the patriarch, the protector, the alpha male of the family, had instantly offered me up as a sacrifice to save his own skin. Beside him, Kyle was frozen. He stood by the wing of his yellow Piper cub, his mouth hanging open. The damp patch on the front of his khakis was growing larger, darkening the fabric in the cruel sunlight. The conqueror of the skies had wet himself. Back up! The lead agent barked, his voice amplified by the silence of the stunned airfield. Hands where I can see them, on the ground, now! I'm doing it, Frank sobbed, pressing his face into the hot, dirty asphalt. See? I'm cooperating. Officer, please, I have a bad back. I watched them. For 20 years, these two men had made me feel small. They had criticized my clothes, my job, my lack of a husband, my choices. They had made me feel like an intruder in my own home. And now, looked at them, groveling in the dirt, terrified of the very power they claimed I didn't have. A mechanical whirring sound drew my attention away from the pathetic display. The main cabin door of the Boeing 747 was opening. The stairs unfolded with hydraulic grace. A figure appeared in the doorway. It wasn't the president, not yet. It was a man in the impeccable dress blue uniform of the United States Marine Corps. Silver eagles on his shoulders glinted in the sun. Rows of ribbons decorated his chest. He was a colonel, the president's military aide, a man who carried the football, the nuclear launch codes. He walked down the stairs with a solemn, heavy gait. He didn't look at the agents. He didn't look at Frank sobbing on the ground. He didn't look at the yellow toy plane. He walked straight through the line of Secret Service agents who parted to let him pass. He stopped exactly 3 feet in front of me. The colonel snapped his heels together. The sound was sharp, like a pistol crack. He raised his right hand in a crisp, slow, perfect salute. It was a gesture of supreme respect, reserved for superiors, for the commander-in-chief, and for those holding the highest offices of the land. "Good morning, Director Nash," the colonel said. His voice was deep, respectful, and carried clearly over the tarmac. "The president is waiting for you in the conference room. We are ready for immediate departure." I didn't salute back. I was a civilian. But I nodded, acknowledging the respect that Frank had denied me for decades. "Thank you, Colonel," I said softly. Before I turned to ascend the stairs, I took one last look back. Frank had lifted his head from the asphalt. He was staring at the colonel. He was staring at the salute. His brain was trying to process the impossible image. The travel secretary, the useless girl, the coffee fetcher. A Marine colonel was saluting her. Frank's mouth worked, opening and closing like a fish on a dock, but no sound came out. The cognitive dissonance was breaking him. He realized in that shattering moment that he hadn't just been wrong. He had been irrelevant. I looked him right in the eye. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I didn't flip him off. I didn't need to. I simply looked at him with the detached curiosity one might have for a bug that had just splattered against a windshield. "Goodbye, Frank," I whispered, though he couldn't hear me over the rising whine of the engines. I turned my back on him. I turned my back on the minivan. I turned my back on the debt I paid, the insults I swallowed, and the keys he had stolen. As I climbed the stairs to the most powerful aircraft on Earth, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. A weight I hadn't realized I was carrying until it was gone. The Secret Service agents began to retreat, moving in formation to follow me, leaving Frank and Kyle alone on the vast, empty runway, small and insignificant under the shadow of my wings. I stepped into the cool, pressurized cabin of Air Force One. The door closed behind me with a solid, final thud, sealing out the heat, the smell of stale yogurt, and the ghosts of my past forever. The wind on the tarmac was violent, whipping my hair across my face, stinging my cheeks with grit and the smell of burnt jet fuel. But as I placed my foot on the first step of the mobile staircase, the chaotic noise of the outside world began to fade. Each step was a physical severance. Step 1. I left behind the humidity of Northern Virginia, the sticky, oppressive heat that had clung to me since childhood. Step 2. I left behind the smell of stale yogurt and the crushed Cheerios embedded in the upholstery of a minivan that had served as my prison cell for the last 2 hours. Step 3. I left behind the voice of a man who had told me, not 10 minutes ago, that I was incapable of understanding aerodynamic lift, while I was currently boarding the only aircraft in the world equipped to survive a nuclear blast. I reached the top of the stairs. The Marine colonel who had saluted me stood aside, holding the door. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His posture said everything. Welcome home, Director. I stepped across the threshold. The transition was instantaneous and jarring in its luxury. The roar of the engines, that deafening, bone-shaking scream, vanished, replaced by the hushed, pressurized silence of the cabin. The air here was different. It was cool, crisp, and scrubbed clean of dust. It smelled of expensive leather, furniture polish, and the rich, dark aroma of freshly brewed Kona coffee. The kind served on silver trays, not in styrofoam cups. A steward in a white jacket nodded to me. Director Nash, can I take your bag? No, thank you, I said, gripping the strap of my go bag. It contained the hard drives. It stayed with me. The president is in the conference room, the steward said, gesturing down the corridor. He's reviewing the initial casualty reports. I walked down the aisle. The carpet was a deep, plush blue, woven with the seal of the President of the United States. To my left, the communications center was buzzing with quiet efficiency. Military aides talking in low voices into secure handsets, typing on laptops that controlled the movements of fleets and armies. This was power. Frank's power was loud. It was shouting at a waitress in a steakhouse. It was confiscating car keys. It was bullying a teenage boy into flying a kite with an engine. Real power was silent. Real power didn't need to shout. It hummed. I reached the door of the conference room. It was open. The President of the United States was sitting at the head of a long, mahogany table. He was in his shirt sleeves, his tie loosened slightly, reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He was studying a topographic map of the North African desert spread out before him. He looked up as I entered. He looked tired, the heavy burdened fatigue of a man who carries the lives of millions in his pocket. But his eyes were sharp. Haven, he said, removing his glasses. He didn't stand on ceremony. We had worked together through 2 hurricanes and a diplomatic crisis in the South China Sea. He knew I didn't care for pleasantries when the clock was ticking. I apologized for the dramatic pickup. The Secret Service wasn't thrilled about landing a 747 on a strip designed for Cessnas, but I told them you don't send coordinates unless it's the only option. It was the only option, Mr. President, I said, placing my bag on the table and pulling out the encrypted drives. My transport was compromised. Compromised? He raised an eyebrow. I thought you had a secure detail. Domestic logistical failure, sir, I said. It won't happen again. The president nodded, accepting the vagueness. He reached for the coffee pot on the table and poured a cup. He pushed it toward me. Black. Just how I took it. Sit, he said. Walk me through the extraction. The Admiral says you want to use the chaotic weather patterns as cover for the Ospreys. It's risky. It's calculated risk, sir, I began, opening my laptop. The sandstorm will blind their radar, but our thermal imaging will cut right through it. If we wait for clear skies, they'll execute the hostages. The president took a sip of his coffee, his eyes drifting to the window on his left. The heavy curtains were pulled back, offering a view of the tarmac below. He paused. He leaned forward slightly, squinting through the thick, bulletproof glass. Director, he said slowly, the Secret Service seems to be having a situation down there. I froze. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Sir? Down there, the president pointed. Near that yellow rig thing. Is that a plane? There are 2 individuals. One appears to be on the ground, being restrained. The other is crying. They're shouting something at the agents. I didn't want to look. I wanted to focus on the map. I wanted to focus on the hostages in the desert. But the president turned to me, his expression shifting from commander-in-chief to human curiosity. "They look frantic," he noted. "And judging by where we landed, they were standing right next to you. Do they know you, Haven?" The cabin was silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the avionics cooling fans. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked down. From this height, Frank was small. He was on his knees, his hands cuffed behind his back. Standard procedure for anyone who rushes a presidential motorcade. He was writhing, his face contorted in a scream I couldn't hear. Kyle was slumped against the wheel of his Piper Cub, head in his hands, defeated. They looked like what they were, small men who had spent their lives trying to make themselves feel big by shrinking everyone around them. The president watched me. He was giving me an opening. He was the most powerful man on the planet. If I said the word, he could make a call. He could have the agents release them. He could have someone explain to Frank that he was wrong. He could grant them a moment of grace. "Do you want me to have an agent go down there?" the president asked softly. "If they are family, we can facilitate a resolution. Make sure they aren't detained." I looked at Frank one last time. I remembered the car keys. I remembered the graduation he missed. I remembered the secretary comments. I remembered the check at the steakhouse. I looked at the president. "No, Mr. President," I said, my voice steady, cool, and utterly devoid of emotion. "No." "They aren't a security threat," I said, turning away from the window and walking back to the table. I sat down and opened the file on the hostages. "And they aren't family. Who are they then?" I looked at the digital map of the world, a world where I made decisions that mattered. "Just civilians, sir," I said. "Curious civilians who got too close to the operation. The agents will handle them." The president studied my face for a second, searching for a crack in the armor. He didn't find one. He nodded, respecting the boundary. "Very well," he said. "Let's get to work." "What's the timeline on the drone strike?" 3 minutes to intercept, I replied. "Pilot." The president pressed the intercom button on the table. "We are clear. Get us wheels up. Let's go to Washington." "Copy that, Mr. President," the pilot's voice crackled. "Prepare for departure." The massive engines roared to life, a deep, powerful vibration that signaled the start of a journey. I didn't look out the window again as the plane began to taxi. I drank the coffee. It was hot, strong, and perfect. I had left the minivan behind. I had left the girl who needed approval behind. I was in the sky now, and for the first time in my life, the air was clear. The Eisenhower Executive Office building has a specific smell. It's a mixture of old paper, floor wax, and the heavy, dusty scent of history. It is a silence so profound that you can hear the hum of the servers 3 floors down. It had been 7 days since Manassas. 7 days since I walked up the stairs of Air Force One and left my former life baking on the asphalt. I sat at my desk, my real desk. It was a massive piece of mahogany that had supposedly been used by a Secretary of War in the 1940s. Behind me, the window offered a view of the Washington Monument, standing stark and white against a gray sky. On the wall, the digital clock ticked in Zulu time, synchronizing the movements of fleets across the globe. My secure line was quiet. The crisis in North Africa was over. The hostages were home. The world was safe. But inside my top desk drawer, buried under a stack of classified briefings, my old personal iPhone was vibrating. I hadn't looked at it in a week. I had left it turned off, enjoying the peace. But today I needed to close the loop. I needed to confirm the intel report on the people I used to call family. I opened the drawer. The screen lit up, harsh and artificial in the dim office. 15 missed calls, 7 text messages, 1 new voicemail. All from Dad Frank. I stared at the name. It didn't evoke fear anymore. It didn't evoke anger. It just looked like a typo, a mistake in the code. I picked up the phone. It felt light, flimsy, like a toy compared to the heavy encrypted devices I used for work. I pressed the speaker button. Frank's voice filled the room, booming and distorted, as if he were shouting directly into the microphone while driving that damn minivan. Haven, sweetheart, it's Dad. The tone was jarring. It was high-pitched, jovial, dripping with a sugary, fake enthusiasm that made my stomach turn. It was the voice he used when he was trying to charm a waitress into giving him a free refill. My God, kiddo, you really had us going. I mean, wow. Secret Service? The President? You are a sly one, aren't you? Keeping all that under your hat. We were just telling the Millers next door. You know Bob Miller, the guy with the lawn tractor? We told him, yep, that's our Haven. We always knew she was destined for greatness. We just had to be tough on her to bring it out. I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers. The audacity was breathtaking. He was rewriting history in real time. He was taking credit for my success. The abuse, the insults, the secretary comments, in his twisted mind that was just tough love designed to build my character. The voice on the recording dropped lower, becoming conspiratorial. This was the pivot. This was the real reason for the call. Anyway, listen, honey, we need to talk. Things are... Well, the town is buzzing. Everyone wants to know you. And Kyle, look, your brother is going through a tough time. That little incident with the Piper Cub really shook his confidence. He's thinking the private pilot route is too slow. I could hear the smile in his voice now. A greasy, transactional smile. I was thinking, since you're basically running the White House now, what if you made a call to the Air Force Academy? Get him a slot. Skip the congressional nomination nonsense. Just get him in. He's got the genes for it, Haven. He just needs a leg up. You know how it is. Family helps family. We're so proud of you, superstar. Call me back ASAP. Mom is making pot roast. Click. The silence rushed back into the room, but it felt different now. It was cleaner. I sat there, dissecting the message like an intercepted enemy transmission. He didn't apologize. Not once. He didn't mention confiscating my car keys. He didn't mention leaving me stranded on the tarmac. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask if I was safe. He saw my power, and his first instinct wasn't respect. It was extraction. He saw me as a resource. I was no longer the useless daughter. I was the golden goose. He wanted me to corrupt a federal institution, to bypass the rigorous standards of the Air Force Academy, standards I respected deeply, just to give his lazy, incompetent son a shortcut to glory. He thought he could just hit the reset button. He thought that by calling me superstar, he could erase 20 years of calling me nothing. It was pathological. It was narcissism in its purest, most malignant form. I looked at the phone. For years, I'd held onto it, waiting for an apology, waiting for them to say, "We see you, we love you." But that message was never going to come. Because you cannot get blood from a stone, and you cannot get love from a parasite. I didn't feel sad. I felt a profound sense of professional clarity. The asset was compromised. The relationship was a liability. My thumb hovered over the screen. I didn't just delete the voicemail. I tapped the share icon. I sent the audio file to a secure cloud folder labeled Legal Harassment Evidence. If Frank ever tried to show up at my workplace, if he ever tried to sell a story to the press about how I abandoned them, I would have his voice, in his own words, trying to solicit a federal favor. Then I went to the contact list. Frank Nash. I scrolled down to the bottom. The red text stared back at me. Block this caller. I pressed it. A pop-up asked me to confirm. Block contact. Next. Helen Nash. My mother. The woman who watched him take my keys and said nothing. The woman who ate the steak I paid for while I was being insulted. Block this caller. Block contact. Next. Kyle Nash. The golden child. The fake pilot. Block this caller. Block contact. I put the phone down. I expected to feel heavy. I expected to feel the weight of orphanhood, the sting of being truly alone in the world. But I didn't. I felt like I did when the landing gear retracted on takeoff. I felt lighter. I felt drag reduction. I looked out the window at the Washington Monument. The sun was breaking through the clouds, illuminating the white stone. I wasn't alone. I had a team of 300 analysts downstairs who respected me. I had a president who listened to me. I had a mission. I picked up the old iPhone one last time. I walked over to the shredder bin in the corner of the room, the one reserved for non-classified electronic waste. I dropped the phone into the bin. It landed with a hollow thud among the shredded paper. I walked back to my mahogany desk. I pressed the intercom button on my secure line. "Director Nash?" My assistant's voice chirped instantly. "Sarah," I said, my voice clear and strong. "Bring me the briefing on the Pacific Rim, and get me a fresh cup of coffee. Black." "Right away, Director." I opened my laptop. The screen glowed with data, maps, and responsibilities. The file on family was closed. The file on my life was just opening. And for the first time, I was the only one with the edit access. The colonnade of the White House is perhaps the most deceptive strip of pavement in America. To the tourists peering through the iron fences on Pennsylvania Avenue, it looks like just a walkway. A simple, open-air corridor supported by white pillars that connects the residence to the West Wing. But when you walk it, really walk it, you feel the weight of the ghosts who have paced these stones before you. Decisions that changed the course of history were made in the space between these columns. Wars were ended, treaties were conceived, and today, for the first time in my life, I wasn't walking it as a staffer or a fixer or a shadow. I was walking it as a free woman. It was late afternoon. The DC sky was a piercing, impossible blue, scrubbed clean by the winds that had swept through the Capitol earlier that morning. To my left, the rose garden was in full bloom. The air didn't smell of exhaust fumes or stale yogurt or the cheap air freshener Frank used to mask the scent of his own failures. It smelled of damp earth, heritage roses, and freshly cut grass. I stopped near a white iceberg rose bush. I reached out, brushing my fingers against a petal. It was soft, but the thorns beneath were sharp. It made me think of Frank. For 20 years, Frank had tried to prune me. He had tried to clip my branches, stunt my growth, and keep me contained in the small dark pot of his own insecurities. He had told me I was weak. He had told me I was just a secretary. He had confiscated my keys to keep me grounded, literally and metaphorically. He thought that if he piled enough dirt on top of me, I would suffocate. He thought that if he buried me under insults and gaslighting and the crushing weight of his own narcissism, I would eventually disappear. I looked up at the white pillars standing tall against the sun. They say there is a Mexican proverb that goes, "They tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds." Frank didn't understand the nature of pressure. He didn't understand that carbon, when subjected to enough crushing weight and intense heat, doesn't crumble. It turns into diamond. Every insult he hurled at me was just another layer of pressure that hardened my resolve. Every time he told me I was incapable of leading, I worked twice as hard to master the art of command. He thought he was breaking me. In reality, he was forging me. I continued walking, the sound of my heels echoing softly against the architecture. I thought about the voicemail I had listened to an hour ago, the desperation in his voice, the transactional love, the way he tried to barter my success for his son's comfort. A week ago, that call would have ruined my day. It would have sent me spiraling into a guilt trip, wondering if I was a bad daughter, wondering if I owed him something for the roof he put over my head, even if I paid for the mortgage on that roof. But today it felt like reading about a weather system on a different planet. It was a storm, yes, but it wasn't my storm. I had closed the window. I reached the end of the colonnade, near the entrance to the Oval Office. There is a presence here, a sense of continuity. I thought of Eleanor Roosevelt, a woman who knew something about being underestimated, about being defined by the men in her life, until she decided to define herself. Her voice seemed to whisper in the breeze, rustling the magnolia trees. No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. For so long, I had given Frank my consent. I had handed him the signed permission slip to belittle me every time I sought his approval, every time I paid a check I shouldn't have paid, every time I climbed into the back of that minivan to keep the peace. I had revoked that consent on the tarmac at Manassas, and I was never, ever giving it back. I realized then that I didn't need a pilot's license to understand flight. Frank and Kyle were obsessed with the mechanics of flying, the flaps, the rudder, the engine. They thought flying was about manipulating a machine. But real flight? Real flight is the ability to rise above the turbulence. It's the ability to look down at the things that used to terrify you, the bullies, the debts, the expectations, and see them for what they truly are. Small, insignificant dots on a map that you have already flown past. Roar. The sound started as a rumble and quickly tore through the silence of the garden. I looked up. High above the Washington Monument, a solitary F-35 fighter jet banked sharply, its afterburner glowing like a star in the daylight. It was likely a patrol from Andrews, securing the airspace over the Capitol. A week ago, that sound would have made me flinch. It would have reminded me of Frank screaming on the runway, of the fear of being arrested, of the chaos. But today, I didn't flinch. I didn't look down. I shielded my eyes against the sun and watched the metal bird carve a path through the heavens. It was loud. It was unapologetic. It was powerful. It was mine. That sky didn't belong to Kyle and his rented Cessna. It didn't belong to Frank and his delusional lectures on aerodynamics. That sky belonged to me. It belonged to the people who did the work, who made the hard calls, who stood in the fire and didn't burn. A smile touched my lips. A genuine, unburdened smile that reached all the way to my eyes. I looked down at my chest. The sunlight caught the laminated surface of my security badge clipped to my navy blazer. It didn't say Frank's stepdaughter. It didn't say Kyle's sister. It didn't say travel secretary. It read in bold black letters, Haven Nash, Director, National Security Council. I adjusted the badge, making sure it was straight. I smoothed the lapel of my jacket. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the sweet, free air of my own life. The oxygen tasted different when you weren't holding your breath, waiting for the next blow to fall. I turned away from the garden, away from the memories of the past, and faced the door to the West Wing. There were briefings to read. There were decisions to make. There was a world to protect. And I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I took a step forward, then another, and I didn't look back. My operation is complete, but I know many of you are still fighting your own battles on the ground. If my story reminded you that your value is never defined by your family's opinion, please honor that truth by hitting the subscribe button and liking this video. It helps us clear the runway for more survivors to find this community. I want to read your briefing in the comments. What is the one boundary you need to set today to reclaim your peace? Share it below. Let's build our own command center right here. Until next time, remember, keep your eyes on the horizon.